Well-respected wife is caught in an affair with her ex-wife's husband is discovering incriminating messages on her phone. Husband, devastated and angry, decides to expose the affair to both families. Lydia sat in the quiet living room, the soft hum of the air conditioner blending with her thoughts. The house, a charming Victorian style with a well-manicured lawn, had been her pride for years. She gazed at the family portraits lining the mantelpiece, her eyes lingering on one taken during a happier time. The photos showed her and her husband, smiling, unaware of the storm that was about to hit their lives. Her husband, Michael, walked in, holding her phone in his hand. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a stormy expression. "Lydia, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense. Lydia's heart sank. She had felt this moment looming, an inevitable consequence she had tried to push to the back of her mind. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael sat down opposite her, the phone still in his hand. "I saw the messages, Lydia. Between you and Augustine. Care to explain?" The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. Lydia's mind raced, searching for the right words, but none came. The affair with Augustine, her high school sweetheart, had started as an innocent reconnection over social media, but it had spiraled into something much more, something she hadn't planned. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice breaking. Michael's eyes, once filled with love and warmth, now bore into her with a cold, hurt look. "How long, Lydia? How long have you been seeing him?" The question echoed in the room, amplifying the gravity of the situation. "A few months," Lydia replied, her voice barely audible. She avoided his gaze, shame washing over her. Michael's hands clenched into fists. "A few months. And all this time, you've been lying to me, to our families. Do they know?" His voice rose, a mix of anger and disbelief. "No, they don't," Lydia said, tears welling up in her eyes. "Michael, I never meant for any of this to happen. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it, Lydia. You've betrayed our marriage, our vows." Michael stood up abruptly. "I need some air." As he left the room, Lydia felt the weight of her actions crushing her. She had jeopardized everything: her marriage, her family, her reputation. The love she had for Augustine, or what she thought was love, now seemed like a distant, foolish dream. The house was silent again, except for the sound of her own sobs. The portraits on the mantelpiece stared back at her, a stark reminder of the life she had put at risk. Lydia knew that this was just the beginning, the first unraveling thread of a tapestry she had woven over years. In her heart, she knew that things would never be the same again. The truth was out, and it was only a matter of time before the repercussions of her actions would ripple through her entire world. As she sat there, alone with her guilt and fear, Lydia braced herself for what was to come. This was the end of the life she knew, and the beginning of a tumultuous journey through the consequences of her betrayal. The following week was a blur of tension and silence in the household. Michael had barely spoken to Lydia since the confrontation, each passing day widening the chasm between them. The weight of the secret Lydia carried grew heavier, suffocating the life out of their once happy home. In a desperate attempt to find some closure, Michael decided to reveal Lydia's affair to their families. He planned a family dinner, inviting both his and Lydia's parents under the pretense of a casual get-together. Lydia, aware of his intentions, felt a knot of dread in her stomach as the day approached. As the families gathered in their dining room, the atmosphere was initially light, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Lydia forced a smile, playing the part of the gracious hostess, while her heart raced with apprehension. After the main course, Michael stood up, his hands trembling slightly. "I have something important to discuss," he announced, his voice steady but cold. The room fell silent, all eyes turning towards him. Lydia's parents, seated across the table, exchanged confused glances. Michael's gaze met Lydia's for a brief moment before he spoke. "I've recently discovered that Lydia has been having an affair with her ex-boyfriend, Augustine." The reaction was immediate and varied. Lydia's mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, while her father's face turned a shade of red, his eyes flashing with anger. Michael's parents sat in stunned silence, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Lydia felt as if the floor had opened beneath her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked around the table, meeting the hurt and confused faces of her loved ones. "It's true," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Her mother burst into tears, while her father slammed his fist on the table. "How could you do this to us, to Michael? After all he's done for you," he exclaimed, his voice filled with betrayal. Michael's mother reached out, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "Michael, we're so sorry. We had no idea." Michael shook his head, avoiding her touch. "I thought everyone deserved to know the truth," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. The dinner quickly disintegrated into a series of heated conversations. Lydia's affair became the focal point, each family member processing the revelation in their own way. Accusations were thrown, tears were shed, and the once warm family bond was now fractured. Lydia sat in silence, the magnitude of her actions crashing down on her. She had not only destroyed her marriage but had also torn apart the fabric of two families. The room echoed with the sounds of her betrayal, each word a piercing reminder of the pain she had caused. As the families left, the house returned to its eerie silence, but the damage was done. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. Lydia knew that the coming days would bring even more challenges as they all grappled with the fallout of her actions. This revelation was just the beginning of a long and painful journey for everyone involved. In the small town where Lydia and Michael lived, news traveled fast, and the scandal of Lydia's affair with Augustine was no exception. Within days, what was once a private matter turned into public fodder, as whispers and rumors circulated through the community. Lydia, once admired for her involvement in local charities and her role as a devoted wife and mother, now faced the judgmental stares and hushed whispers of her neighbors. Each trip outside her home became a gauntlet of shame and embarrassment. She could feel the eyes on her, the unspoken accusations and pitying looks that followed her wherever she went. Augustine, who had once been a beloved figure in the community during his high school years, was now the subject of scorn. His attempts to visit local spots were met with cold shoulders and outright hostility. The affair had not only tarnished Lydia's reputation but also cast a shadow over his own. At the local grocery store, Lydia overheard two women gossiping in the next aisle. "Can you believe Lydia and Augustine? And poor Michael, caught in the middle of it all," one said, her voice dripping with a mix of pity and disdain. Lydia hurriedly left the store, groceries half forgotten, her face burning with humiliation. The ride home felt longer than usual, each red light a reminder of the stop sign she had ignored in her moral judgment. Michael, too, was not immune to the community's reactions. At work, his colleagues tiptoed around the subject, their awkward attempts at normalcy only serving to deepen his sense of isolation. His once impeccable reputation as a trustworthy and upright member of the community was now overshadowed by the personal drama that unfolded in his home. Lydia's and Michael's social circle, once a source of joy and support, fractured under the strain of the scandal. Dinner invitations ceased, and the friendly waves from neighbors dwindled. Their friends were divided, some choosing sides, others retreating altogether to avoid the uncomfortable situation. The ripple effect of Lydia's affair was most evident in their children's lives. Their son, a high school sophomore, faced questions and taunts from his peers. Their daughter, in middle school, found herself suddenly isolated, her friends' parents forbidding them from visiting the house. As the weeks passed, the initial shockwave of the revelation began to settle into a new, uneasy normal. Lydia and Michael, once pillars of the community, now found themselves on the outskirts, navigating a world that viewed them through a lens of scandal and tragedy. Lydia lay awake at night, replaying the events over and over in her mind. The affair, which had seemed like an escape from her mundane life, had turned into a nightmare, affecting not just her and Michael, but everyone they knew. She realized the enormity of the damage her actions had caused, not just in her marriage but throughout the entire community. As Lydia and Michael grappled with their new reality, they both knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The echoes of the affair had spread far and wide, changing their lives and the lives of those around them in ways they had never imagined. The weeks following the revelation of Lydia's affair with Augustine felt like walking through a relentless storm. Lydia watched as her world, once full of love and laughter, crumbled around her. She struggled with a whirlwind of emotions: guilt for the pain she caused, grief for the life she lost, and a confusing mix of longing and regret over her relationship with Augustine. In the midst of this turmoil, Augustine reached out to her, his messages a mix of apologies and declarations of love. He spoke of starting anew, away from the judgmental eyes of their community. But for Lydia, the reality of their situation was far more complex than a mere escape plan. Lydia grappled with the consequences of her actions. The affair, once a secret escape, now felt like a heavy chain around her neck. She struggled to reconcile her feelings for Augustine with the devastation their relationship had caused. The man she once saw as a symbol of freedom and passion was now a reminder of her betrayal. Meanwhile, Michael was at his own crossroads. The revelation of the affair had shattered his trust, leaving him to question every moment of their marriage. The love he once felt for Lydia was now tainted with bitterness and hurt. He poured himself into his work, using it as a refuge from the chaos at home. The distance between Lydia and Michael grew with each passing day. Conversations were limited to necessities, their interactions strained and awkward. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now echoed with the silence of their broken relationship. Lydia's parents, deeply hurt by her actions, struggled with their own feelings of betrayal and embarrassment. They offered support, but their disappointment was evident in every conversation. Lydia felt their pain acutely, adding another layer of guilt to her already burdened conscience. In the midst of this, Lydia's son confronted her. "How could you do this to us, Mom?" he asked, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. His words cut through her heart, a painful reminder of the ripple effect her actions had on her family. Lydia knew she had to make a decision. Continuing her relationship with Augustine meant leaving behind her family, her community, and everything she had ever known. But staying meant facing the consequences of her actions and attempting to rebuild her life from the ruins. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Lydia realized that there was no easy way out. Each path was fraught with pain and uncertainty. The affair had irrevocably changed her life, and now she had to face the reality of her choices. In another part of town, Augustine, too, faced his own crossroads. The affair had cost him more than he had anticipated. He longed for Lydia, but the weight of their actions and the impact on their families and community weighed heavily on him. He wondered if their love, born out of a betrayal, could survive the aftermath. As Lydia and Michael, and even Augustine, stood at their respective crossroads, they each had to confront the hard truths of their situation. The decisions they made would not only shape their futures but also the lives of those around them. The path forward was unclear, and each step was fraught with the potential for further pain and redemption. As autumn leaves began to blanket the streets of their small town, Lydia and Michael found themselves navigating through the aftermath of the storm that had upended their lives. The community's initial shock over Lydia's affair with Augustine had subsided into a reluctant acceptance, but the scars it left were deep and palpable. Lydia, once a vibrant presence in the community, now moved through her days with a quiet resignation. The hurtful whispers had lessened, but the looks of pity and judgment that occasionally met her eyes were a constant reminder of her indiscretion. She threw herself into volunteer work, seeking solace in helping others, hoping to find some redemption in selfless acts. Michael, on the other hand, was enveloped in a cocoon of introspection and legal proceedings. The divorce papers, once a threat looming over their marriage, had become a reality. He met with lawyers, sifted through shared assets, and faced the heart-wrenching task of co-parenting discussions. Despite the pain, he found a surprising resilience within himself, a strength born out of necessity and the desire to provide stability for their children. The children, in their own ways, grappled with the new family dynamics. Their son, now quieter and more introspective, found solace in his music, while their daughter clung to the routines that offered her a sense of normalcy in a world that had shifted beneath her feet. Lydia's and Michael's families, after the initial turmoil, rallied in support, albeit with a tinge of sadness that often hung in the air during family gatherings. Lydia's parents, still nursing their disappointment, offered her a shoulder to lean on, while Michael's parents became a steady presence in helping with the children. In this new normal, Lydia and Augustine's paths seldom crossed. Augustine had retreated, grappling with his own set of consequences. The affair had cost him not only his reputation but also a chance at a relationship he had once idealized. He remained a figure in the periphery of Lydia's life, a bittersweet reminder of a chapter that was closing. Lydia often found herself reflecting on the choices that led her to this point. The affair, once a thrilling escape, now felt like a distant, painful memory. She learned to embrace the solitude, using the time to introspect and understand the deeper reasons behind her actions. It was a journey of self-discovery, fraught with uncomfortable truths and hard-earned lessons. Michael, in parallel, began to rediscover his own identity, separate from his role as Lydia's husband. He reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies he had long neglected, and slowly began to envision a life beyond the hurt and betrayal. As the story of Lydia, Michael, and Augustine drew to a close, the overarching theme was one of healing and resilience. The affair had been a catalyst for change, forcing each character to confront their flaws, their strengths, and their capacity for forgiveness. In the end, Lydia stood at the threshold of a new beginning. The road ahead was uncertain and undoubtedly challenging, but she stepped forward with a newfound understanding of herself and her place in the world. The autumn leaves crunched under her feet as she walked, a symbol of change in the passage of time, a reminder that even after the harshest of storms, life finds a way to move on, to heal, and to grow anew. A couple in a long-distance, open marriage, navigate the complexities of love and independence across continents, ultimately finding a deeper connection and renewed commitment in a transition to monogamy. In the quaint, bustling streets of Paris, Vincent strolled with a sense of purpose, his mind often drifting across the Atlantic to his wife, Sophia. They had chosen a life less ordinary, a marriage that spanned continents, he in Europe, she in North America. Their love story was not penned with conventional ink, it was a testament to the modern age, a narrative punctuated by time zones and technology. Vincent, a tall, slender man with thoughtful eyes, had always been a wanderer at heart. His job in architectural design allowed him the luxury of working remotely, a benefit that fed his nomadic soul. Sophia, with her vibrant personality and love for academia, found her calling as a sociology professor in Toronto. They had met during one of Vincent's brief sojourns to Canada and, against all odds, their connection had been instantaneous and deep. Their decision to enter into an open marriage was born not of necessity, but of a profound understanding of each other's independence. It was an agreement forged with mutual respect and trust, qualities that had become the bedrock of their relationship. They communicated daily, their conversations a blend of mundane details and deeper musings about life and love. This particular morning, Vincent's phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Her words were a warm embrace, a reminder of their unbreakable bond. He smiled, typing a response before slipping the phone back into his pocket and continuing his walk to a quaint cafe he frequented. Here, he often sat, sipping espresso and working on his designs, his thoughts occasionally drifting to Sophia. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Sophia's day was just beginning. Her apartment in Toronto was a cozy, eclectic mix of modern and vintage, much like her life. As she sipped her morning coffee, she gazed at the photo of her and Vincent on the mantel. It was taken in Paris, on their last visit together, a moment frozen in time. She missed him, a feeling that was both a sweet ache and a comforting constant in her life. Sophia's schedule was packed, filled with lectures, meetings, and research. Yet, she always made time for her own pursuits outside her marriage. She had a vibrant social circle and occasionally went on dates, experiences she openly shared with Vincent. Their openness with each other was not just about physicality, it was a sharing of experiences, an expansion of life's canvas. Their marriage was a delicate dance of love and freedom. They cherished their individual spaces, yet they were intricately connected. The trust they had in each other was unwavering, and their conversations were never hindered by distance. Video calls, texts, emails, these were their lifelines, their way of bridging the physical gap. In the evening, as Vincent prepared dinner in his Parisian apartment, he video called Sophia. Seeing her face on the screen, hearing her laughter, he felt the distance melt away. They talked about their days, their plans, and their love, reaffirming the unique nature of their relationship. As they ended the call, promising to talk again the next day, Vincent gazed out his window at the Paris skyline. Despite the physical distance, he felt Sophia's presence, as if she was right there with him. Their love was a journey of discovery, one that transcended boundaries and defied conventions. In their different worlds, they shared one heart, beating in unison across the miles. Vincent's day in Paris started with the brisk morning air wafting through his open window, carrying the distant hum of the city waking up. As he got ready for his day, his thoughts wandered to Sophia, thousands of miles away yet so vivid in his mind. His life in Europe was a blend of old-world charm and contemporary hustle, a balance he had learned to navigate seamlessly. In his circle of friends and colleagues, Vincent was known for his easygoing nature and deep intellect. He had always been open about the nature of his marriage, finding that honesty made his life simpler. His relationships outside his marriage were respectful and clear in their boundaries, something he attributed to the strong foundation he and Sophia had built. Today, he had a lunch date with Elise, a fellow designer he had met at a gallery opening. Their connection was purely intellectual, a meeting of creative minds. Vincent found these interactions invigorating, often sharing insights with Sophia, who always encouraged his explorations. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Sophia's life in Toronto was a colorful tapestry of interactions and experiences. Her university campus was a buzz of activity, and she thrived in its vibrant atmosphere. Her work as a sociology professor was not just a job, it was her passion, providing her with endless material to ponder and discuss with Vincent. Sophia's social life was an eclectic mix of academia and adventure. She often went out with friends, enjoying the diverse cultural offerings of the city. Her experiences with open dating were varied, some deep and meaningful, others light and fleeting. She shared these experiences with Vincent, their openness an essential thread in the fabric of their marriage. Their mutual understanding was not without its challenges. Sometimes, Sophia would feel a twinge of jealousy hearing about Vincent's dates, a natural human reaction she mused. But their foundation of trust and communication always saw them through. They had learned to navigate these emotions with honesty and empathy. Back in Paris, after his lunch with Elise, Vincent spent the afternoon at his studio, immersed in his designs. His work was more than a profession, it was a form of expression, a way to leave his mark on the world. He often shared his projects with Sophia, seeking her perspective, which he valued immensely. As the day turned to evening, Sophia wrapped up her lectures and headed to a local art exhibit. She enjoyed these solo adventures, finding them a source of inspiration and reflection. Her life was a beautiful balance of independence and partnership, a rhythm she had mastered over the years. Later that night, as Vincent and Sophia connected over their daily video call, they shared the details of their days. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, a testament to the strength of their bond. They discussed Vincent's lunch with Elise and Sophia's plans to go hiking with a friend the next weekend. Their openness was not just about sharing experiences, it was about sharing life itself. As they said their goodnights, a comfortable silence settled between them, a silent acknowledgement of their unique bond. Despite living in separate worlds, they were connected by unseen ties, a love that was as unconventional as it was unbreakable. The sun had barely risen in Paris, casting a soft glow on the historic buildings. Vincent lay awake, his mind wrestling with a sense of unease that had been growing in recent weeks. The challenges of a long-distance, open marriage were not new to him, but lately, they seemed to weigh heavier. He missed Sophia more acutely, her absence felt more profound in the quiet moments of dawn. As he prepared for his day, Vincent reflected on the recent strains. The time difference between Paris and Toronto often meant truncated conversations or delayed responses. He longed for the ease of shared time zones, where a spontaneous call or a quick message didn't require calculations and adjustments. In Toronto, Sophia faced her own set of challenges. The cultural differences, though subtle, sometimes created misunderstandings in her interactions with others. She missed the effortless understanding she shared with Vincent, born from a shared background and deep emotional connection. Her recent dates had been lackluster, leaving her feeling more isolated in her experiences. Vincent's day was filled with meetings and deadlines, the usual rhythm of his professional life. However, a sense of disconnection lingered in the back of his mind. He found himself checking his phone more often, hoping for a message from Sophia. The physical distance between them felt more pronounced, a gap that technology couldn't always bridge. Sophia's day at the university was similarly occupied, but her thoughts kept drifting to Vincent. She wondered about the sustainability of their arrangement. Their open marriage had always been a source of strength, but now it seemed to echo with a quiet loneliness. The independence they both cherished was starting to feel like a double-edged sword. That evening, as they connected over their usual video call, the conversation took a more serious turn. Vincent shared his feelings of disconnection, his words resonating with Sophia's own sentiments. They discussed the challenges of different time zones and the emotional toll of their physical separation. It was a conversation filled with vulnerability, a testament to the trust they had nurtured over the years. Sophia listened intently, her heart aching with empathy. She shared her recent feelings of isolation, admitting her struggles with the cultural differences and the lack of meaningful connections in her dating life. It was a moment of raw honesty, a sharing of insecurities and fears. The conversation shifted to their memories, reminiscing about the times they had spent together. They spoke of Parisian evenings and Toronto adventures, each memory a reminder of their deep bond. These reflections brought a sense of comfort, a reminder of the strength of their relationship. As they ended the call, a plan began to form. They agreed to make more effort to synchronize their schedules, to find time for longer conversations and more meaningful connections. They decided to focus on quality over quantity in their communications, making each interaction count. Vincent lay in bed that night, gazing at the stars through his window. The conversation with Sophia had brought a sense of clarity. Their love was not without its challenges, but it was resilient, capable of weathering the storms of distance and time. In Toronto, Sophia wrote in her journal, a practice she found therapeutic. She penned down her thoughts and feelings, a mixture of love, longing, and hope. Their journey was not an easy one, but it was theirs, unique and profound. The challenges they faced were just another chapter in their extraordinary story, a narrative of love that spanned continents and defied norms. Sophia's heart fluttered with anticipation as she navigated the bustling Charles de Gaulle airport. After months of separation, she was finally in Paris to reunite with Vincent. The familiar aroma of freshly baked croissants and café au lait filled the air, bringing back a flood of memories from her previous visits. Vincent, equally excited, waited outside, his eyes scanning the crowd for Sophia. The moment he saw her, a wave of relief and joy washed over him. Their embrace was a long-awaited solace, a physical manifestation of their deep emotional connection. The first few days were a blissful blur of shared moments. They revisited their favorite spots in Paris, the city holding a special place in their hearts. The Louvre, Montmartre, and the banks of the Seine, each place echoed with laughter and intimate conversations. The joy of being together again was palpable, a balm to the months of separation. However, as the initial euphoria settled, subtle shifts became apparent. Vincent noticed changes in Sophia's mannerisms and preferences, subtle yet undeniable. She seemed more independent, her experiences in Toronto shaping her in ways he hadn't anticipated. Sophia, in turn, sensed a newfound introspection in Vincent, a change from his usual carefree demeanor. Their conversations started to probe deeper, exploring these changes. Vincent shared his recent introspections about their lifestyle, wondering if their open marriage was still serving them as it once had. Sophia listened, her thoughts mirroring his. She admitted to feeling a growing need for a deeper connection, something that transient relationships couldn't fulfill. The realizations were confronting, yet necessary. They talked about the evolution of their feelings, the natural progression of any long-term relationship. The physical distance had amplified these changes, making them more pronounced upon reunion. As they walked along the Seine one evening, the city lights reflecting in the water, they delved into a heartfelt discussion about their future. The open aspect of their marriage, once a source of liberation, now seemed to cast a shadow of doubt on their relationship. Sophia voiced her concerns about the emotional impact of their lifestyle. She missed the simplicity of monogamy at times, the undivided attention and commitment. Vincent nodded in understanding, sharing his own concerns about the emotional toll of their arrangement. The conversation was a turning point. They realized that the strength of their relationship lay in its fluidity, its ability to evolve with time. The open marriage had served its purpose, but now it was time to reassess and redefine their terms. The decision to shift towards a more traditional, monogamous setup was mutual. It was not a step back, but rather a step forward, a reflection of their current needs and desires. The change was a testament to their ability to grow and adapt, to put their relationship above all else. As their time in Paris drew to a close, Vincent and Sophia felt a renewed sense of connection. They promised to be more mindful of their needs, to communicate openly as they navigated this new phase of their relationship. Sophia's return to Toronto was bittersweet, but they parted with a sense of hope. Their relationship had weathered many storms, and this latest realization was just another testament to their enduring love. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it together, stronger and more united than ever. The sun dipped below the horizon in Paris, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Vincent stood on his balcony, reflecting on the recent changes in his life. The decision to transition to a monogamous relationship with Sophia had been significant, yet it felt right. It was a new chapter in their journey, one that filled him with a sense of hope and determination. Sophia, back in Toronto, found herself in a similar reflective state. The shift in their relationship dynamics had brought a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. Their time apart had been a period of growth and self-discovery, and now, they were ready to embark on this new path together. Their daily conversations took on a new depth. They spoke about their future with excitement, discussing plans to eventually live together in the same city. The physical distance between them was still a challenge, but their commitment to each other had never been stronger. They were more intentional in their interactions, each call and message a reaffirmation of their love and dedication. Vincent found himself rediscovering Sophia, appreciating the nuances and changes in her personality. He was enamored by her strength and independence, qualities that had only deepened over time. His own experiences in their open marriage had taught him much about himself, lessons he now brought into their renewed relationship. Sophia, on her part, felt a sense of peace and contentment. The decision to be monogamous had lifted a weight off her shoulders, a weight she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. She found joy in the simplicity of their commitment, a stark contrast to the complexities of their previous arrangement. The challenges they faced were different now, but they tackled them with a unified front. They worked on closing the physical distance, planning visits, and eventually, a permanent move. The logistics were daunting, but their resolve was unwavering. As the months passed, their relationship blossomed. The decision to focus solely on each other brought a level of intimacy and understanding that they had not experienced before. They learned to cherish the mundane aspects of their lives, sharing the small details that they had previously overlooked. Vincent's plan to relocate to Toronto became a reality. The move was a significant step, marking the end of their long-distance relationship. The day he arrived in Toronto, Sophia was waiting for him, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Their reunion was a celebration, a testament to the trials they had overcome and the love that had sustained them. Together in Toronto, Vincent and Sophia began building their life anew. They explored the city, creating new memories in the place that had once only been part of Sophia's world. Their relationship thrived in the shared space, each day a discovery of the joys of being together. As they sat in their new home one evening, looking out at the Toronto skyline, they reflected on their journey. The path they had taken was unconventional, filled with twists and turns, but it was uniquely theirs. They had embraced the changes, growing individually and as a couple. Their story was a reminder that love is not static, it is a dynamic force that evolves with time and experience. They had learned to adapt, to communicate, and to love in ways they had never imagined. Their journey was a testament to the power of embracing change, of facing the unknown with an open heart and mind. In their different worlds, they had shared one heart, and now, in their shared world, their hearts beat together, stronger and more in sync than ever before. Husband, a well-respected member of his community, returns home unexpectedly to find his wife in a compromising situation with their neighbor. The initial shock and hurt set the stage for Rodolphe's decision to take a public route for his revenge. Rodolphe had always prided himself on his ability to anticipate the unexpected. His career as a respected community leader and a successful entrepreneur was a testament to his foresight and meticulous planning. But nothing could have prepared him for the scene that greeted him as he stepped into his home that fateful evening. It was supposed to be just another business trip, a routine overnight stay in the neighboring city. But a last-minute cancellation had brought him home earlier than planned. He had imagined surprising Diana, his wife of 15 years, perhaps finding her in the midst of one of her book club meetings or lost in a painting, her latest hobby. Instead, he found her in their bedroom, but she was not alone. There, tangled in the very sheets he had picked out on their last vacation to Italy, was Diana and their neighbor, a man he had considered a friend. The room, once a sanctuary of their love and shared dreams, was now a stage for betrayal. For a moment, time stood still. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the room, highlighting the stark contrast between the serenity of their home and the chaos of the moment. Rodolphe's heart raced, a tumultuous mix of shock, pain, and disbelief coursing through him. His first instinct was to confront them, to unleash the storm of emotions brewing within. But something held him back. It was the same strategic mind that had navigated boardroom betrayals and business rivalries with calm precision. He stepped back, quietly closing the door, the soft click a stark finality to the life he had known. As he retreated to the solitude of his study, Rodolphe's mind began to race. Thoughts of their life together, the moments they had shared, the promises made, all flickered through his mind like a montage of a life that now seemed like a farce. He had loved Diana, with a depth that he had thought was reciprocated. They had built a life together, a life he had thought was built on trust and mutual respect. But the reality before him painted a different picture. A picture of deception and lies. Rodolphe knew he had to act, but not in haste. He needed a plan, a way to navigate this betrayal with the same acumen with which he approached everything in life. The hours passed as Rodolphe sat in his study, the ticking of the grandfather clock a reminder of the time slipping away, time that he once thought he would spend growing old with Diana. He knew the community would talk. They were, after all, a well-known couple, involved in numerous social and charitable endeavors. The thought of public humiliation and pity was unbearable. But Rodolphe was not a man to be pitied. He was a man of action, a man who believed in taking control of the narrative of his life. And so, as the clock struck midnight, Rodolphe had formulated a plan. It was not a plan born out of anger or a desire for a dramatic confrontation. It was a plan that would ensure that he came out of this debacle with his dignity intact and perhaps, in time, his heart healed. With a newfound resolve, Rodolphe turned off the lights in his study and headed to bed, a bed he now knew he would soon be leaving. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end of his life with Diana, but it would also be the first step towards a new chapter, one that he would write on his own terms. The morning after the discovery was a study in normalcy, a theatrical performance where Rodolphe played the unsuspecting husband. He watched Diana, observing her every move and word, looking for signs of guilt or duplicity he had missed before. But she was the same as always, affectionate, cheerful, discussing plans for the upcoming weekend, unaware of the storm brewing within him. Rodolphe left for work, his mind a whirlwind of strategy and emotion. He knew the path he was about to tread would change their lives irrevocably. As he drove, he contemplated the nature of the public exposé he planned. It wasn't just about revealing the affair, it was about reclaiming his narrative, controlling the story before rumors and half-truths did it for him. At his office, Rodolphe sat behind his desk, a bastion of his success and hard-earned respect. Here, he had made decisions that affected the lives of hundreds, perhaps thousands. Now, he was about to make a decision that would affect the most intimate parts of his life. He opened his laptop and began to write, not a business proposal or a strategic plan, but a public statement. In it, he detailed his discovery of Diana's betrayal with their neighbor. He included everything: the date, the time, his early return, the scene that greeted him. He crafted his words carefully, ensuring they conveyed his sense of betrayal and hurt without stooping to vindictiveness. It was a delicate balance, portraying himself as the wronged party without seeming vengeful. As he wrote, Rodolphe felt a mix of catharsis and dread. He knew that once he released this statement, there was no turning back. The private pain of his marriage would become public fodder. Friends, family, colleagues, even strangers would weigh in on his most personal crisis. In the midst of his writing, Rodolphe paused, reflecting on the memories of his marriage. There were happy times, moments of genuine affection and companionship. He had loved Diana, perhaps he still did in some tortured corner of his heart. But the trust that was the bedrock of their relationship had been irrevocably shattered. By lunchtime, the statement was ready. Rodolphe read it over several times, each reading cementing his resolve. He would release it on social media, where their friends, family, and community members were most active. It would be a controlled explosion, precise and calculated, just like everything else he did. Before he could second-guess his decision, Rodolphe posted the statement. He watched as the likes, comments, and shares began to trickle in, a small stream that soon turned into a flood. The reactions were varied: shock, support, anger, even some who accused him of airing dirty laundry publicly. But amidst the chaos of public opinion, Rodolphe felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was out, no longer a shadow in his heart. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Rodolphe handled his business affairs with his usual efficiency, but his mind was elsewhere, on the inevitable confrontation that awaited him at home. As he drove back that evening, he knew that the life he had known was over. But there was also a sense of liberation, a feeling that he was no longer bound by the lies and deceit that had shackled him. Rodolphe arrived home to find Diana waiting, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. She had seen the post, seen the reactions. The stage was set for the next act in their unraveling drama, and Rodolphe was ready to play his part. The confrontation between Rodolphe and Diana that evening was a collision of hurt, betrayal, and shattered illusions. Diana, tearful and remorseful, pleaded for forgiveness, trying to explain the unexplainable. Rodolphe, however, remained resolute, his decision to go public with the affair creating an impassable chasm between them. The house, once filled with the warmth of shared dreams and laughter, now echoed with the cold, hard truth of their broken vows. Diana's pleas turned to accusations as she condemned Rodolphe's decision to expose their private life. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone we know," she cried, her voice a mixture of anger and despair. Rodolphe listened, his expression unreadable. He understood her pain, the humiliation she felt, but it was overshadowed by his own sense of betrayal. "It was my humiliation too, Diana," he replied evenly. "Our friends, our family, they deserved to hear the truth from us, not through whispers and rumors." As the night wore on, the initial storm of emotions gave way to a somber realization of the irreversible damage done. They were no longer discussing apologies or forgiveness, but rather the logistics of separation and the inevitable divorce. The conversation was clinical, devoid of the warmth that had once defined their relationship. Meanwhile, the social media post Rodolphe had released earlier that day had taken on a life of its own. Comments and messages poured in, some offering support and sympathy, others criticizing his decision to make such a private matter public. The story spread beyond their immediate circle, drawing in a wider audience, fascinated by the downfall of a prominent couple. The next morning, Rodolphe awoke to find his phone flooded with notifications and missed calls. There were messages from friends expressing shock, colleagues offering awkward words of support, and even inquiries from local media. The community he had been a part of for so long was now viewing him through a lens of scandal and tragedy. At work, Rodolphe found himself at the center of whispered conversations and furtive glances. His usual commanding presence in meetings was overshadowed by the unspoken thoughts of his colleagues. He plowed through his responsibilities with his usual efficiency, but the sense of isolation was palpable. As the day progressed, the reality of his situation began to sink in. Rodolphe realized that in his quest for control and truth, he had opened a Pandora's box, the contents of which he could no longer contain. His personal agony had become public spectacle, and there was no turning back. Back at home, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Diana had moved into the guest room, and their interactions were limited to necessary conversations about practical matters. The distance between them was more than just physical, it was a chasm of hurt and betrayal. As Rodolphe lay in bed that night, the house eerily silent around him, he pondered the cost of his actions. Yes, he had reclaimed the narrative of his life, but at what price? His marriage was over, his private pain was now public gossip, and the community he had valued was looking at him with different eyes. In the quiet of the night, Rodolphe wondered if the truth was worth the destruction it had wrought. The answer, like the future that lay ahead, was uncertain and shrouded in the shadows of regret. In the days following the public revelation, Rodolphe's life settled into a new, uncomfortable rhythm. The initial shockwaves caused by his social media post had rippled outwards, and now he was left to navigate the choppy waters of their aftermath. The reactions from their social circle varied wildly. Some friends reached out with tentative words of support, not quite sure how to bridge the gap his actions had created. Others, closer to Diana, cut ties altogether, their silence speaking volumes. The neighbor, the other man in this drama, had become a pariah, disappearing into his own vortex of shame and regret. Rodolphe's professional life, once a bastion of control and respect, was now tainted by whispers and sidelong glances. Colleagues who once greeted him with smiles now offered awkward nods, their interactions strained. Business meetings, once dominated by his confident presence, were now peppered with unspoken questions about his personal life. At home, the situation was no less strained. Diana had become a ghost, her presence felt more in the spaces she left empty than in the few words they exchanged. The divorce proceedings, initiated swiftly, were progressing with a clinical efficiency that belied the years of emotion they were severing. Rodolphe found himself retreating more and more into his work, using it as a shield against the chaos of his personal life. Yet, even here, he could not escape the reality of what he had done. The public exposé, meant to be an act of taking control, had left him feeling more out of control than ever. One evening, as Rodolphe sat alone in his expansive, yet now seemingly empty house, he found himself scrolling through the social media post again. The comments had grown in number and intensity. Some praised his bravery for exposing the truth, while others condemned him for washing their dirty linen in public. Each comment was a reminder of the irreversible step he had taken. It was during these long, solitary nights that Rodolphe began to question his decision. Had he been right to expose Diana and their neighbor so publicly? Was the momentary satisfaction of controlling the narrative worth the lasting damage to his personal and professional life? He thought about Diana, about the life they had built together. There had been love once, a deep, consuming love that had seemed unshakable. How had it come to this? Where had they lost their way? The questions haunted Rodolphe, offering no answers, only a deepening sense of regret. As the legal formalities of their divorce neared completion, Rodolphe found himself standing at a crossroads. The path he had chosen had led him here, to this place of loneliness and introspection. He had sought justice, a way to right the wrongs done to him, but at what cost? The final chapter of their marriage was being written in legal documents and division of assets, a cold end to what had once been a story of love and companionship. Rodolphe realized that in seeking to expose Diana's betrayal, he had also exposed his own vulnerabilities, his own failings as a husband and a partner. The lesson was a hard one, and as Rodolphe lay in bed, the quiet of the house a stark reminder of his newfound solitude, he understood that some truths came at too high a price. The cost of his public revelation was not just the end of his marriage, but perhaps also the end of the man he had once been. As the final papers of the divorce were signed, Rodolphe found himself in the midst of a quiet house, surrounded by the remnants of a life he once knew. The legal documents, neatly stacked on the dining table, represented the closure of a chapter filled with love, betrayal, and eventual heartbreak. In the aftermath of the divorce, Rodolphe's days took on a monotonous rhythm. Work continued to be a refuge, but the sense of accomplishment that once fueled him seemed dulled. The accolades and successes, which had previously brought satisfaction, now felt hollow. His colleagues' cautious approach and the hushed tones that greeted him in meetings were constant reminders of the personal saga that had spilled into his professional life. The social media post that had once seemed like a beacon of truth now felt like a glaring reminder of his impulsive decision to expose Diana and their neighbor. The post, which he had revisited numerous times, was now a source of deep regret. The comments and discussions it had sparked, initially a source of vindication, now echoed the complexity and pain of the situation he had created. In moments of solitude, Rodolphe's mind often wandered back to the life he and Diana had shared. The memories of their early years together, filled with laughter and mutual dreams, contrasted sharply with the silence and estrangement that marked their final days as a couple. He pondered over the what-ifs. What if he had confronted Diana privately? What if he had sought to understand rather than expose? What if he had chosen forgiveness over revenge? The impact on his social life was profound. Invitations to gatherings and community events, once plentiful, had dwindled. Friends who had been a part of their couple's circle seemed unsure of how to interact with him now. The camaraderie and sense of belonging he had once enjoyed were replaced by a sense of isolation. His decision to go public had not only cost him his marriage but had also altered his social landscape. One evening, as Rodolphe sat in his study, he came across an old photograph of him and Diana from a holiday they had taken years ago. Their smiles, so full of genuine happiness and love, seemed like a snapshot from another lifetime. The realization that he had played a part in the destruction of that happiness weighed heavily on him. Rodolphe began to understand that his quest for justice, for controlling the narrative, had come at a great personal cost. The satisfaction of exposing the affair had been fleeting, replaced now by a deeper understanding of the complexities of human relationships and the consequences of actions taken in anger and hurt. In a moment of introspection, Rodolphe realized that true strength lay not in exposing others, but in understanding and managing one's own emotions. He recognized that forgiveness, though far more challenging than revenge, might have brought a more peaceful resolution to his inner turmoil. As Rodolphe looked out of his study window, the setting sun casting a soft light over the room, he contemplated the journey ahead. It was a path of healing, of learning from the mistakes of the past, and moving forward with a newfound wisdom. The road to rebuilding his life, both personally and professionally, would be long and fraught with challenges. But it was a journey he was now ready to embark on, with a heart that, though bruised, was open to the lessons of the past and the possibilities of the future. The wife's journey in the open marriage leads her to explore her own identity and sexuality, discovering new aspects of herself. She regrets her decision when she sees her husband becoming distant and less invested in their relationship. Julien and Adeline's home was always filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the comforting routine of a couple deeply in sync. But beneath the surface, a restlessness was brewing, a silent wave threatening to disturb the calm. One cool autumn evening, as they sat on their cozy, well-worn sofa, Adeline turned to Julien with a seriousness in her eyes that he rarely saw. "Julien, we need to talk about us," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Julien, a man of few words but deep emotions, looked at her with concern. "What's on your mind, Ade?" he asked, his brows furrowing. Adeline took a deep breath. "I've been feeling like we're in a rut. We love each other, yes, but there's a part of me that's yearning for something different. Something more," she said, hesitantly. Julien's heart sank. He had sensed a change in Adeline but never imagined it was this profound. "What do you mean, Ade?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I've been thinking about us having an open marriage," Adeline blurted out, her eyes searching his for a reaction. The words hit Julien like a tidal wave. An open marriage? The concept was foreign, almost alien to him. He loved Adeline with every fiber of his being, and the thought of sharing her with someone else was unimaginable. "Why, Adeline? Aren't you happy with me?" Julian asked, a hint of pain in his voice. It's not about happiness, Jules. It's about exploring, about knowing ourselves better. It doesn't change how I feel about you, Adeline tried to explain, her hands nervously fidgeting with the hem of her skirt. Julian looked away, trying to process the storm of emotions inside him. He loved her, yes, but could he accept this? The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Julian turned back to her. If this is what you need, Ade, I'll try to understand. But I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. This is all so new, he said, his voice laced with a mix of love and uncertainty. Adeline reached out, taking his hand in hers. I know it's a lot to ask, Jules. We don't have to rush into anything. Let's just think about it, talk more, and see where we stand, she suggested, a hopeful note in her voice. That night, as they lay in bed, Julian couldn't help but feel a chasm growing between them. Adeline's breathing was steady, but his mind raced with questions and fears. Could their love withstand this test? Was he enough for her? The comfort of their shared bed, once a sanctuary, now felt like uncharted territory. As the moonlight streamed through their window, casting a soft glow over their room, Julian realized that their lives were on the cusp of a significant change. A new horizon was upon them, whether he was ready for it or not. And with that thought, he finally drifted into a restless sleep. In the weeks following their conversation, Julian and Adeline embarked on their new, uncertain journey. The house, once a haven of shared experiences, now felt like a station where two travelers met briefly before heading off to explore different worlds. Adeline, driven by a mix of curiosity and a desire for something new, was the first to take a step into this uncharted territory. She met people, went on dates, exploring connections that were vastly different from what she shared with Julian. These encounters were exhilarating at first, offering a rush of novelty, but they soon began to feel hollow. Each laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes, each conversation that skimmed the surface, left her feeling more adrift. Meanwhile, Julian approached the situation with trepidation. He couldn't deny the sense of betrayal that gnawed at him each time Adeline dressed up for another date. Yet, amidst this turmoil, he found an unexpected sense of freedom. He started going out too, more out of a sense of fairness than desire. It was on one of these reluctant outings that he met Elise. Elise was different. She was vibrant, full of life, and had a way of looking at the world that intrigued Julian. Their conversations were effortless, filled with laughter and depth. With her, Julian discovered parts of himself he never knew existed. They shared interests in art and literature, and their discussions often lingered long into the night. For the first time in a long time, Julian felt a spark, something that both excited and scared him. Back home, Adeline noticed the changes in Julian. He was more distant, often lost in thought, and she could tell his mind was often with someone else. A pang of something akin to jealousy surged through her, an emotion she hadn't anticipated in her quest for liberation. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, an awkward silence hanging between them, Adeline couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Julian. He seemed more confident, his eyes often lighting up with an inner joy that she hadn't seen in years. "How was your evening out yesterday?" Adeline asked, trying to sound casual. "It was good. Elise and I went to a poetry reading." "It was interesting," Julian replied, his voice tinged with a happiness that he couldn't quite hide. Adeline felt a twinge in her heart at the mention of Elise's name. "That sounds nice," she said, forcing a smile. Inside, she was grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. She had initiated this open marriage, yet she wasn't prepared for the reality of Julian finding joy with someone else. As they continued their meal in silence, Adeline couldn't shake off the feeling that they were at a crossroads. The excitement she had once felt about the open marriage was now replaced by a deep sense of unease. She looked at Julian, her partner, her friend, her love, and wondered if she had made a grave mistake. That night, lying in bed, Adeline realized the gravity of the situation. The open marriage, meant to be a journey of self-discovery, was leading her down a path of self-reflection and doubt. The untrodden paths they had embarked upon were taking them further away from each other, and the fear of losing what they had was slowly creeping in. As autumn faded into a brisk winter, the dynamics of Julian and Adeline's relationship continued to evolve, each day bringing its own set of challenges and revelations. Adeline found herself in a labyrinth of introspection, questioning the very foundations of her desires and decisions. Her explorations in the open marriage, initially thrilling, had gradually become a mirror reflecting her deepest insecurities and longings. Each new encounter, rather than filling the void she felt, only seemed to deepen it. The men she met were interesting, some even charming, but none could match the depth of connection she shared with Julian. It was a realization that came with a mix of sadness and clarity. Julian, on the other hand, found a refreshing sense of self in his friendship with Elise. Their bond was growing stronger, not just as lovers but as confidants. Elise's vibrant personality and her passion for the arts rekindled a part of Julian that had lain dormant. He found himself engaging in new hobbies, reading more, and even trying his hand at painting, a long-forgotten interest. With Elise, Julian discovered sides of himself he had forgotten or never knew existed. Meanwhile, Adeline watched this transformation in Julian with a complex mix of emotions. She was happy to see him invigorated, but it also served as a stark reminder of what they once had. The sight of his newfound hobbies around their home, things he had started to share with Elise, was a constant nudge of their drifting paths. Adeline missed the intimacy of their shared interests and dreams. One day, as Adeline sat alone in their living room, surrounded by Julian's new art supplies and books recommended by Elise, the reality of their situation hit her hard. She had encouraged this openness, thinking it would bring them growth and excitement, but instead, it seemed to be pulling them apart. The room, filled with the physical manifestations of Julian's new life, felt less like their shared space and more like a gallery of their separate journeys. In a moment of solitude, Adeline reflected on her own journey. She realized that her pursuit of new experiences was less about the experiences themselves and more about filling an undefined void within her. The more she ventured out, the more she understood that what she truly sought was a deeper connection with Julian, not a replacement of it. That evening, when Julian returned home, the air between them was different. Adeline's eyes were filled with a vulnerability that Julian hadn't seen in a long time. They talked, not about their day or their plans, but about their feelings, fears, and the silent gap growing between them. "I miss us, Julian," Adeline confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in what seemed like ages. "I miss us too, Adeline," he admitted, his voice laced with a mix of regret and longing. They sat together, in their once familiar living room, now a collage of their separate lives, and for the first time in months, they felt a glimmer of their old connection. It was a painful yet honest acknowledgement of the distance that had grown between them, and the first step towards bridging it. The conversation that night didn't solve their problems, but it opened a door to understanding and, perhaps, healing. Winter's chill had deepened, blanketing the city in snow and bringing a reflective quiet to Julian and Adeline's home. The air inside, once thick with unspoken tensions, now carried a cautious hope after their heartfelt conversation. Julian continued to see Elise, but with a new awareness. Their relationship, enriched by genuine affection and intellectual kinship, was undeniably important to him. Yet, his recent conversations with Adeline had opened his eyes to the delicate balance between his marriage and this new connection. He found himself in a quandary, torn between the comfort of his established life with Adeline and the exhilarating novelty of his relationship with Elise. Adeline, meanwhile, had taken a step back from her own explorations. Her dates and outings had ceased, not out of obligation, but from a newfound understanding of what she truly sought. She spent her days reflecting, often gazing out the window at the snow-blanketed world, pondering the intricate dance of love and commitment. Her heart ached with a mix of regret and yearning, longing for the closeness she and Julian once shared. As the days passed, Julian's absences became more noticeable, his late returns from outings with Elise leaving a cold void in their home. Adeline tried to mask her discomfort, focusing on her own journey of self-discovery. However, the silence of the house, once a solace, now echoed with the quiet unrest of her thoughts. One particularly cold evening, as Adeline sat wrapped in a blanket, lost in thought, Julian returned home, his face flushed from the cold and eyes sparkling with an energy she hadn't seen in a long time. He spoke animatedly about his evening with Elise, about a gallery they visited, and a new artist they had discovered. Adeline listened, her heart sinking with each word. She was happy to see Julian so alive, yet it was a painful reminder of the emotional distance between them. The following day, Adeline ventured out to visit a friend, seeking a respite from the growing loneliness in her heart. Her friend, perceptive and understanding, listened as Adeline poured out her fears and doubts. "It's like we're living parallel lives," Adeline confided, "and I don't know how to merge them back together." Meanwhile, Julian found himself at a crossroads. His time with Elise was fulfilling, but the growing strain it put on his marriage was undeniable. He recognized the deep love he still had for Adeline and the life they built together. The thought of losing her, of losing the essence of their shared history, weighed heavily on him. That night, as Julian and Adeline sat together, the room felt colder, the distance between them more profound. Adeline mustered the courage to voice her feelings. "Julian, I feel like I'm losing you," she said, her voice laced with a vulnerable honesty. Julian looked into her eyes, seeing the woman he had loved and grown with over the years. "Adeline, I'm scared of losing us too," he admitted, his voice reflecting his inner turmoil. The conversation that unfolded was raw and emotional. They talked about their fears, their desires, and the uncertain future of their relationship. It was a conversation filled with tears and confessions, a cathartic release of the emotions they had both been holding back. As they talked, the snow outside continued to fall, a silent witness to the shifting tides of their relationship. The path forward was unclear, but for the first time in months, they were walking it together, hand in hand. The night was long, and the conversation difficult, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one where they faced their challenges together as partners. The winter snow began to thaw, signaling the arrival of spring and bringing with it a time of reckoning for Julian and Adeline. The raw conversations of the past weeks had laid bare the depths of their feelings and the complexities of their situation. It was a period of profound introspection, forcing them both to confront the reality of their relationship. In the ensuing days, Julian and Adeline found themselves navigating a delicate dance of reconnection and reflection. They spent evenings talking, sometimes till dawn, unraveling the threads of their marriage. Each conversation, laden with emotion, peeled back layers of their bond, revealing both love and loss. Julian, torn between his deep affection for Adeline and the genuine connection he had found with Elise, struggled with guilt and confusion. His heart ached at the thought of hurting Adeline, yet he couldn't deny the fulfillment he found in his relationship with Elise. It was a tug-of-war of emotions, with no clear resolution in sight. Adeline, on the other hand, grappled with her own revelations. Her journey through the open marriage had brought her face to face with her insecurities and desires. She realized that her quest for something more had led her to overlook the beauty of what she already had with Julian. Yet, the pain of feeling him drift away was a constant reminder of the distance that had grown between them. One crisp spring evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Adeline reached for Julian's hand. "Julian, where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian looked at her, his eyes reflecting the turmoil within. "I don't know, Adeline. I love you, but I'm not sure that's enough anymore," he replied, the honesty in his voice cutting through the cool air. The conversation that followed was perhaps the most challenging they had ever had. They delved into the essence of their marriage, acknowledging the love that had brought them together and the changes that had pulled them apart. It was a heart-wrenching acknowledgement that love, sometimes, isn't enough to bridge certain gaps. As the night wore on, a painful realization dawned on them both. Their paths, once so intertwined, had diverged too far to find their way back to each other. The open marriage, intended to bring a new perspective, had instead magnified the gaps and differences that time and routine had masked. With heavy hearts, they came to the mutual, yet agonizing decision to end their marriage. It wasn't a decision born out of anger or betrayal, but out of a deep understanding of their individual needs and the recognition that they could no longer fulfill those needs together. The divorce proceedings were handled with the same respect and love that had characterized their marriage. It was a bittersweet farewell to a chapter of their lives that had brought them both joy and growth. As spring gave way to summer, Julian and Adeline parted ways, not as enemies, but as friends who had shared a significant journey. They both stepped into their new lives with a sense of gratitude for the years spent together and a hopeful outlook for the future. Their love story didn't have the ending they once envisioned, but it was a story that taught them about the complexities of love, the importance of self-discovery, and the courage it takes to let go. The final chapter of their marriage closed, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance and a hope for new beginnings. "My neighbor informed me that he witnessed my wife with another man during my work hours, and here's how I retaliated against my unfaithful spouse." In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, the sun gently rose over the neat row of houses, casting a warm, golden glow. Albert, a tall man with kind eyes and a ready smile, hummed softly to himself as he prepared breakfast. Today, like every other day, he would leave for work with the comforting image of his wife, Anouk, still asleep, her dark curls sprawled across the pillow. Albert and Anouk had been the epitome of a happy couple. They met in college, fell in love, and married shortly after graduation. Their life together was marked by comfortable routines and shared dreams. Albert worked as an engineer, while Anouk was a freelance graphic designer. Their evenings were often spent in each other's company, enjoying simple pleasures: a movie, a homemade dinner, or a walk around the neighborhood. As Albert poured coffee into his travel mug, he glanced at the clock. He prided himself on punctuality, a trait that Anouk often teased him about. He left a gentle note for Anouk on the fridge, a small token of his affection, and stepped out. The morning air was crisp, and the neighborhood was waking up. Mr. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor, was already tending to his roses. "Morning, Albert," he called out, waving a gnarled hand. Albert waved back, his thoughts already drifting to the day's tasks. It was as he was getting into his car that Mr. Jenkins approached him, a hesitant expression on his weathered face. "Albert, I hope I'm not out of line here, but there's something you should know." Albert felt a flicker of unease. Mr. Jenkins was a man of few words, and his serious tone was uncharacteristic. "What is it, Mr. Jenkins?" "It's about Anouk," the old man began, pausing as if weighing his words. "I've seen her a few times with someone else when you're at work." "A man." "They seemed close." The words hit Albert like a physical blow. His mind refused to process them. His Anouk, with another man? It seemed impossible. They were happy, weren't they? "Are you sure?" Albert's voice was barely a whisper, his mind racing with confusion and denial. I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't, Mr. Jenkins replied, his eyes filled with sympathy. I thought you should know. Albert thanked him, his mind in a whirlwind of emotions. As he drove to work, the image of Anouk with someone else haunted him. He tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as a misunderstanding. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The day at work was a blur. Albert found himself staring at his computer screen, the numbers and diagrams meaningless. His thoughts kept drifting back to Anouk, to their life together. Had there been signs he'd missed? Moments he'd overlooked? Returning home that evening felt different. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like uncharted territory. Anouk greeted him with her usual smile, oblivious to the storm raging in his heart. Dinner was a quiet affair. Albert watched Anouk, searching for any hint, any clue that could confirm or deny Mr. Jenkins' words. But there was nothing, just the familiar comfort of their shared life, now tainted with suspicion. As they settled in for the night, Albert lay awake, the shadows of doubt looming large. He knew he couldn't ignore Mr. Jenkins' words. The truth, whatever it was, needed to be confronted. But for tonight, he lay there, the weight of the unseen betrayal pressing down on him, a silent wedge in the bed they shared. The next morning dawned with a heavy stillness in the air, reflecting the turmoil in Albert's heart. He had spent a sleepless night, turning over Mr. Jenkins' words in his mind. With each passing hour, his initial shock had given way to a piercing sense of betrayal. Albert sat at the kitchen table, his coffee untouched, as he waited for Anouk to wake up. He watched her as she entered the kitchen, her hair tousled from sleep, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. "Good morning," Anouk greeted him cheerily, leaning in for a customary kiss. But today, Albert recoiled slightly, his heart racing. Anouk, sensing something amiss, frowned. "Albert, is everything okay?" He looked at her, really looked at her. This was the woman he had loved and trusted for years. The thought of her betrayal was unbearable, yet unavoidable. Taking a deep breath, Albert decided it was time to confront the truth. "Anouk, I need to ask you something," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. "Is there someone else?" The color drained from Anouk's face. For a moment, she was silent, her eyes darting away. Then, with a sigh, she nodded. "Yes, there is someone else." The confirmation hit Albert like a tidal wave. The room seemed to spin around him as a myriad of emotions crashed over him: anger, sadness, disbelief. "How long?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "A few months," she replied, her voice laced with regret. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Albert struggled to process her words. The life he thought they had, the future they had planned, it all felt like a lie now. "Why, Anouk? Why did you do this?" he asked, his voice rising with a mixture of pain and anger. Anouk looked down, her fingers nervously playing with the hem of her shirt. "I don't know, Albert. I was feeling lost, and he was there. It was a mistake." A mistake. The word echoed in Albert's mind. He had devoted himself to their marriage, to her. And yet, it had been so easy for her to throw it all away. The room was heavy with a palpable tension. Albert knew what he had to do. The trust they had was shattered, and he couldn't see a way to piece it back together. "I can't do this, Anouk. I can't be with someone who betrays me like this," Albert said, his voice firm. Anouk's eyes filled with tears. "Albert, please, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. We can work through this." But Albert knew there was no going back. The love he had for her was now tainted with a bitterness he couldn't shake off. "I want a divorce, Anouk," he said, the words feeling surreal even as they left his lips. Anouk gasped, her face crumpling in pain. But Albert was resolute. He stood up, his heart heavy with a grief he couldn't yet comprehend. He had loved her, trusted her, and now, he was walking away from the life they had built together. As he left the room, Anouk's sobs filled the air, a haunting reminder of what they had lost. Albert knew this was just the beginning of a painful journey, but he also knew it was the only way forward. The weeks following the confrontation were a blur for Albert. The once familiar walls of their home felt cold and alien. Each corner held memories of a life that now felt like a distant dream. The divorce proceedings were set in motion, a stark, painful reminder of the chasm that had opened up in his life. But amidst the turmoil, a seed of determination took root in Albert. He refused to let this betrayal define him. He started by clearing out their shared belongings, each item a step in reclaiming his space, his identity. The house slowly transformed, echoing Albert's internal metamorphosis. Albert realized that he had, over the years, neglected his own passions and interests. He decided it was time to reconnect with the parts of himself that had been overshadowed by his role as a husband. He returned to his old hobby of painting, something he had set aside in the busy years of his marriage. The act of putting brush to canvas was therapeutic, each stroke a release of the emotions bottled up inside him. He also joined a local gym. The physical exertion was a welcome distraction, and with time, he began to see changes not just in his physique but in his confidence. The gym became a sanctuary, a place where he could channel his energy and frustration into something positive. Albert also rekindled old friendships. He had not realized how much he had isolated himself, how many connections he had let slip away. His friends welcomed him back with open arms, providing support and companionship that he hadn't realized he was missing. They encouraged him to try new activities, and soon, Albert found himself enrolled in a cooking class, discovering a new passion for culinary arts. Perhaps the most significant change came when Albert decided to travel. He had always dreamed of visiting Europe, a dream he and Anouk had shared but never realized. Now, he decided to embark on the journey alone. The trip was eye-opening. He wandered through ancient streets, sampled exotic foods, and met people from all walks of life. The experience was invigorating, a stark contrast to the monotonous routine of his previous life. As he traveled, Albert journaled his experiences. He wrote not only about the places he visited but also about his feelings, his growth, and his reflections on the life he was leaving behind. Writing became a form of self-expression and introspection, helping him process his emotions and envision a future full of possibilities. Albert returned from his travels a changed man. The hurt and betrayal still lingered, but they no longer consumed him. He had rediscovered his zest for life, his independence, and his ability to find joy in new experiences. One evening, as he sat in his revamped living room, surrounded by his paintings and travel souvenirs, Albert realized he had turned a corner. He had emerged from the shadow of his failed marriage stronger, more aware of who he was and what he wanted from life. The journey had not been easy, but Albert knew that it was necessary. He had built a new life for himself, one that was rich and fulfilling in ways he had never imagined. And as he looked ahead, he felt a sense of hope and excitement for what the future held. Months had passed since Albert's return from Europe, and with each passing day, his transformation became more pronounced. The timid, heartbroken man who had once been unable to face the world was now a distant memory. In his place stood a confident, driven individual, ready to embrace life's challenges. Albert's newfound confidence wasn't just an internal change, it was reflected in every aspect of his life. At work, he took on more responsibilities and pursued innovative projects. His colleagues noticed the change, and soon, Albert found himself being offered a promotion. It was a testament to his hard work and newfound dedication. This professional success was a sweet victory, a clear sign that he was moving in the right direction. But Albert's transformation wasn't just confined to his career. His social life, once a neglected aspect of his existence, was now thriving. He had become a regular at local events, often surrounded by friends who were drawn to his charismatic personality. He even started dating again, albeit cautiously. His relationships were now built on mutual respect and understanding, a far cry from the dependency and insecurity of his past. One of the most fulfilling outcomes of Albert's journey was his involvement in community projects. He volunteered at local charities and participated in events that aimed to bring people together. He found a sense of purpose in helping others, a fulfillment that his previous life had lacked. As Albert's life continued to improve, he became an inspiration to those around him. People were drawn to his story of resilience and transformation. He began to share his experiences, speaking at local gatherings and workshops, encouraging others to embrace change and overcome adversity. Anouk, who had been a distant figure since their divorce, came back into the picture during this time. She had heard about Albert's successes and changes. One day, she approached him, a mix of curiosity and regret in her eyes. They met at a cafe they once frequented, a place that held memories of their life together. Anouk looked different to Albert, or perhaps it was his perception of her that had changed. She spoke of her life, her voice tinged with remorse. She had been through a tough time, grappling with the consequences of her actions. Anouk confessed her regret, admitting that seeing Albert's transformation made her realize the magnitude of her mistake. She hinted at a desire to rekindle their relationship, to be part of his new life. But as Albert listened, he felt no anger or bitterness. Instead, he felt a sense of detachment, an understanding that their paths had irrevocably diverged. He had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his peace of mind. He wished her well, but he knew that their chapter had closed. As they parted ways, Albert felt a sense of closure. He had come full circle, from the depths of despair to a place of peace and contentment. The pain of the past had given way to a hopeful present and an optimistic future. Albert walked away from the cafe, the sun setting behind him, casting a warm glow. He smiled to himself, grateful for the journey he had undertaken. He had risen from the ashes of his old life, and now, the world was full of endless possibilities. As autumn arrived, bringing with it a tapestry of orange and red hues, Albert found himself in a reflective mood. The trees shedding their leaves reminded him of his own journey of letting go and renewal. He had come a long way from the man who was broken by betrayal. Albert's life was now a harmonious blend of work, hobbies, and social commitments. He had established a routine that was both fulfilling and balanced. His evenings were often spent in the art studio he had set up in his home, where he lost himself in his paintings, or out in the community, where he had become a respected figure. Despite the positive changes, there were moments when the past crept up on him. Memories of Anouk, their life together, the good times before everything fell apart. But these moments of nostalgia were no longer painful. They were mere echoes of a past life, reminders of how far he had come. One such evening, as Albert was walking home, he was surprised to find Anouk waiting outside his house. There was a vulnerability about her that he hadn't seen before. She looked older, somehow smaller, and her eyes held a deep sadness. "Albert, can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated for a moment but then nodded. They sat on a nearby bench, the crisp autumn air around them. Anouk spoke first, her words tumbling out in a rush. She talked about her life after the divorce, how things hadn't gone the way she had hoped. She had been through a series of short-lived relationships, each one leaving her more disillusioned than the last. She had lost friends, respect, and her sense of self in the process. "I've had a lot of time to think," she said, looking down at her hands. "And I've realized how much I lost when I lost you. I see now how selfish I was, how I took your love for granted." Albert listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. He could see the genuine remorse in Anouk's eyes, the wish for a different past. Anouk, I've forgiven you, he finally said. But that part of my life, our life, is over. I've moved on. Anouk nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I know, and I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know how sorry I am. They sat in silence for a while, lost in their own thoughts. The sun had set, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the evening sky. Eventually, Anouk stood up. Goodbye, Albert, she said softly. I'm glad to see you happy. As she walked away, Albert felt a profound sense of peace. He had come to terms with his past, and he was genuinely hopeful for his future. In the weeks and months that followed, Albert continued to thrive. He found love again, a deep and mature love with someone who shared his passions and values. His art was featured in a local exhibit, and his professional life continued to prosper. Albert often thought about the twists and turns of life, how moments of deep pain can lead to profound growth. He was grateful for his journey, for it had shaped him into the man he was today. As he sat in his studio, a blank canvas in front of him, he realized that every ending was a chance for a new beginning. And with a smile, he began to paint, the colors bright and bold, a reflection of his journey, his loss, his healing, and his hope.